Hello and welcome back to our ongoing series on Muslims across the globe, the history, the past, and the present of Muslims all over the world. And we've been talking about all the dimensions of history, traversing centuries of how Muslim thought communities have developed and evolved all over the world. And today we are going to focus with Dr. Akbar S Ahmed, a leading scholar, academic, a writer, and of course a thinker, on what books should be read to understand Muslims and their past and their present, because there's so much of fog of misconception, of lies, of prejudice, that it needs to be sort of undone, and knowledge, ilm, as we Muslims call it, is the best way to do so. So, Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed, I think, tell us about the key books that you think everyone must read, and those in the West or those in the East, wherever they are, to understand Muslim societies and their cultures and their histories. Over to you.
You set me a task, a very tough task, which is to select 10 books. And it's a tough task because there's so many books, but I have worked hard, and I hope you'll give me an A for the effort. Now, let me start by quoting the French philosopher who said, "I think, therefore I am." And to Muslims, the equivalent of this is the notion of ilm, because ilm in the Quran and the example of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, is to constantly, God is telling us, seek ilm, gather ilm, because through ilm, you're able to see the universe, the stars, the planets, and make sense of the world that God has created and that we are creating for ourselves. My whole ilm ethos was based on the idea of knowledge and books, and absorbing books and reading books and ideas in the books. So I have selected a list. I'll go very quickly through it. And I hope your viewers will pick up these books because they are accessible. They're also profound. And they also have certainly taught me a great deal about my faith and my culture and my religion. I would suggest Karen Armstrong's book on the Holy Prophet called Muhammad, A Biography of the Prophet, and The Battle for God. So 2 books by Karen Armstrong. The first, of course, is a straightforward biography. The second is a very interesting book in which she, in great detail, tells us that the conflict is not between Islam and the West. The conflict is within the Abrahamic faiths. So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all have a conflict within them between the fundamentalists, she calls them the fundamentalists, the literalists, and the moderates, the liberals. And this is being seen throughout the world, and this is causing the turbulence. The third book I would suggest is by Ahmed Kila. He's an Englishman who converted to Islam, and he brings some insights into Islam, and he has a recent book, Rethinking Islam and the West, a new narrative for the age of crises. And in this, he explores a Quranic notion, that of mizan, or balance, in our lives, which would help us cope with this new world forming around us. He lives in Cambridge, and he has contributed, like many other converts, to the understanding of Islam. Then there is, of course, the great Maria Rosa Menokal, whose book, which I love, is called The Ornament of the World, How Muslims, Jews, and Christians Created a Culture of Tolerance in Medieval Spain. This book is like a treasure chest. It's full of stories and full of dazzling anecdotes about Muslim rule in Andalusia and the contribution they made. The next book is not that bright and light. It's a dark book. It's called The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel Huntington. And it's a straightforward thesis that the West is involved in a clash with the Eastern civilizations, which include Islam, the Russian civilization, the Chinese, and the Indian. So again, you've got something that is there, which we face, and this has become popular in the media. So a lot of media people cite this particular book. The next one, I would quote another political scientist, John Mearsheimer, who's written The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Very popular book, very influential book, and he talks about the great powers of today, the US, Russia, China, and he includes India as an emerging power, and their clash and their conflict and their jostling for power against one another. The next book I would recommend is Shashi Tharoor's Inglorious Empire, What the British Did to India. It's well worth looking at this book because from a leading Indian intellectual, Shashi Tharoor, we get the idea of how the British mistreated India. And he's focusing, of course, on all of India. And I think it'll help us to understand what the British did to South Asia. And we were, of course, the Muslims ruling South Asia for centuries when the English came and destroyed the Muslim empire. Remember, in 1857, Muslims lose an empire, an emperor, a language, a culture, turning point in history. The next book is a book, again, of love and peace. And it is a book by Coleman Barks, an American who fell in love with Jalaluddin Rumi. And his, I think, most famous, he's written many, or rather translated many of his Rumi's books. But this is a very popular one. It's Jalaluddin Rumi, The Essential Rumi. Full of beautiful sayings, verses, thought and ideas of the great Jalaluddin, the great Maulana. Next book is Edward Said's Orientalism. Again, it's now almost 40 years old, but it's a standard book, well worth reading, full of scholarship, full of wisdom, and full of passion. He very strongly argues very strongly that Western societies, because they are so prejudiced against Muslims, they can never understand the Muslim world. And he gives example after example after example. And he's so passionate that now, so many decades after his writing, you can almost feel the heat of his anger. The final book in this list is that of Abdul Rahman Azam, an Oxford scholar who's written a superb book on and called Saladin, Salahuddin, the great ruler of the Middle East. Again, the hero who recaptures Jerusalem from the Crusaders. Now, he explains how Salahuddin did this, why he was significant, and we are able to face understand the heroes of our own past. I would add one more book in this list, and especially relevant for interfaith understanding. It's a book based in years of fieldwork by Dr Ahmed called Gems and Jewels, The Religions of Pakistan. And this concept of gems and jewels is really taken from the great Sufi poets of the Punjab, Bulle Shah, and these great, and in the Sindh, where these Sufis talk of movements and sects like the Sufi sects as gems and jewels, very often misunderstood by central government. My own books, we've quoted Journey into Europe, Islam, Immigration and Identity, Journey into America, The Challenge of Islam, The Thistle and the Drone, How America's War on Terror became a global war on tribal Islam. And finally, my book on Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic Identity, The Search for Saladin. So here I link up Quaid-e-Azam with the Muslim search for rulers and leaders like Salahuddin. So this is a cycle and we complete the cycle. So this, Raza, was my list, and I hope your viewers will have made some notes. And if not, I'll send you this list and you can put it up on your screen.
I'll certainly do that. Please do. And Dr. Ahmed, I would also like you to quickly speak about your own books in a quick manner, because we've been talking about them and referring to them throughout this series for many weeks now. So if you can just, at the end of this particular video, if you can speak a bit about your books and just introduce them to the listeners and viewers, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Raza. My books, I wrote a quartet of books for Brookings Press in Washington. It's a press very well known, very influential, and it's linked to the policy outlets and institutes here in Washington. It's not really as academic as, say, Cambridge or Oxford, but it's very highly regarded because of its influence. And I was associated as a fellow at one stage, so I had the privilege of getting them to publish these books. So these books are structured. So I began by a journey into Islam. So I traveled throughout the Muslim world, Middle East, South Asia, Far East Asia, and I wrote this book, Journey into Islam, about Muslim societies in Africa and Asia. The second book was Journey into America. So trying to understand America and its relationship with the Muslim world. So they're all structured, and there's a reason why I wrote them. And then I began to think of the periphery in Muslim societies. The peripheries, the communities, the tribal societies living in the interstices between two nations. So in Pakistan and Afghanistan, you have the tribal belt. So the tribes living on both sides of the border. That's tribes in the interstices. And I did a study of 40 case studies from Morocco through the Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia. And that was the thistle and the drone. And finally, of course, I have Jinnah, Pakistan, and Islamic identity. And this is part of the Jinnah Quartet, which I had done in the 90s. So the Brookings Quartet was something that I did after 9/11, and partly as a response to 9/11.
Right. That is fantastic, Dr. Ahmed. And thank you so much for being with us and walking us through your own scholarship, your own observations, because all of them matter when we talk about subjects as complex and as multidimensional as the history of Muslims. So with that, once again, thank you.